In this review, we're going to be reviewing the Tisas Devil Ray Carry in 45 ACP, plus a couple additional upgrades you might want to make to this handgun. For those who might not be familiar, Tisas is a company based out of Turkey that was founded in 1993 and then created a U.S. extension of the company in Knoxville, Tennessee in 2022. Now, if you watched my videos in the past, you know that I've always loved 1911s. I grew up firing and shooting 1911s all my life. And one of the versions that I like the most is the Commander versions, because they are instead of the full 5-inch length barrel, it has the 4 1/4, and it just balances out well for me. And that's why I've tended to own a lot of these over the years. And one of the other nice additions I like, especially with some of the higher end ones, are the Ed Brown bobtail frame cuts, which allow, when you're carrying, to cut down on the print, and it just kind of really holds a lot better in my hands. But I do really like the Commander models that are out there. Now, there are a lot more 1911 options today than when I learned how to shoot in my youth. There are a ton more. So if you've never owned a 1911 or have owned some from the past, you might be surprised at really how good a quality and the types of value you can get today, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. Now, this is my second Tisas. My previous Tisas, which I reviewed here, is the Tisas Yukon 10mm, which again I reviewed in the list below, in the links below, and actually really liked this gun, but it needed a couple refinements. And I'm going to be talking about some additional refinements here as well. Now, they were critical refinements on the Yukon that literally inhibited the performance. But in the case with the Carry model, the Devil Ray, it is not necessary to do them, but I'm going to talk about them if you want to improve the quality of the gun. Now, let's look at some of the features of this gun. The first thing is it comes with a black Cerakote finish. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of Cerakoting unless it's done right. They really did it right. The second thing you're going to notice is there is both front as well as back slide cuts. All my guns, by the way, have been safety checked before we did the video. They also come with Novak 3-dot sights. And you'll also notice that the sights are dovetailed into the frame, so you can easily slide them out and carry them out. It also has a bobtailed hammer, which you can see here, as well as an ambi safety. Included with this is also a beaver tail grip safety, as well as a memory bump, which again you would typically see in higher quality 1911s. It also, as I mentioned before, has a bobtailed frame grip cut. Again, that cuts down on the printing as well as makes it much more comfortable to fire. There are, however, no front and rear grip serrations in this gun. Now, you're going to contrast that with, for example, the Yukon. So a lot of times in the higher end 1911s, you're going to see serrations both in the front and the back of the strap. And of course, you need this on the Yukon because a 10mm is a very stout load. It isn't as necessary, I've found, at least for me when I'm shooting 45s, especially if you have good grips. And that's what they have on here. They have these nice G10 sunburst textured grips on here, which again, you can easily change out at any time you want. But what I found, at least in my experience, is it's important to have the full size grips on here, especially if you don't have the serrations, because again, it makes it much more comfortable. And you contrast that, for example, with a lot of these newer mid to lower range 1911s are coming out with these slim grips. And the slim grips, the challenge with the slim grips are, even though they might feel better in the hand initially, you're putting more of your tension on the front and the back of the straps. And that's where it becomes even more important to have serrations here. But in my opinion, I have an average size hand. I like the full size grips that come on 1911s, especially the one with the Tisas here. And as long as these are good, again, textured G10 grips, they're very easy to work with. And the other thing about this is you can easily find these on Amazon or anywhere else and replace them for, you know, like $20, give or take. Very easy to swap them out to any type of color or texturing you want, but they do come with nice grips as well. There's also a skeletonized trigger that comes on this. It has a very nice break on it. Now, my break when it came out of the box was around 5.5 pounds, and I'm going to talk about some of the upgrades I've made to the trigger since then that were actually fairly easy to do. Other things you're going to notice here is the trigger guard has been undercut, so again you can have a little bit nicer hold onto it, as well as there's a slight beveling in the mag well as well, so that makes it just easier to load the handgun. The other thing is it comes with 2 8-round magazines. Now, it comes in a box like this, and you're going to typically see these with Tisas with the cleaning rods and then 2 magazines. And surprisingly, these magazines really aren't that bad. They're 8-round magazines. I've fired maybe about 400 rounds through both of them, have not had any problems with them. Now, normally when I shoot a 1911, if I'm buying magazines, I buy Wilson Combats, but if they work, I'll stick with them. And they also come with the plastic blade or base plate as well. So they're actually pretty good magazines, pretty reliable. Of course, on a 1911, you know, there's a lot of good reliable magazines out there, but at least for me, they actually work pretty well. So you get 2 of those with the kits. Another thing I really like about the Tisas, as I talked about in the Yukon review, is these are all forged handguns now. They don't use any MIM parts. Now in 2022, they decided to do away with metal injected molding parts, and the only exception is the recoil spring plug, which again, you don't need to have that as a forged part, but all the other components on here are forged parts. And the other part, the other thing about this that I really like is the fact that all the internals are based upon a Series 70 Colt design, which again, a lot of people in the 1911 community consider to be the gold standard for 1911s. The other thing I like about this gun is the slide and frame lockup are just really nice, especially for something that isn't really custom made. And then of course is the weight. So what I want to show you real quickly is the weight of this gun. It comes in around 2 pounds, 4.5 ounces. Now, that's with the magazine inserted empty. Now, compare this, for example, to a full size that comes in at 2 pounds, 7 ounces. So it's just slightly less in weight, of course, because you've got a little bit shorter barrel, as well as you've got the cut on the end. But again, that cuts off a little bit of the weight. Now, if you want to see what this would be like carrying it fully loaded, you're coming in around 2 pounds 10, 2 pounds 11 ounces. So it's not a light handgun, but again, that's why you're firing it. It's part of physics. There also are versions Tisas makes of the 45 and the 9mm where you can get an aluminum frame as well. But personally, I like running pretty stout rounds out of my 45. And this is just the right balance, the right amount of weight I want to counterbalance the effects of the recoil, especially if I'm shooting a Commander Series handgun. Now, what I want to talk about is some of the upgrades. So if you're considering buying one of these, what are some of the things you can do to upgrade them, at least that I worked on? So the first thing is a very simple thing, which is if you buy one of these Tisas, you're going to notice, especially after the first time you fire them, your grip panels are going to start coming loose. And that's actually a very easy fix. All you have to do is get some blue Loctite thread lock, and what you can do is put it on the screws and then reinsert the screws and let them dry, and then that'll keep your panels pretty much in place, so you won't really have to worry about your grip panels coming up. Now, the second thing that you're going to probably want to do has to do with the safety. The manual safety, I prefer to have a very positive detent on my manual safety. And a lot of times, even some of the mid-range to some of the higher-end 1911s, I've noticed that has very inconsistent tensions on these, but it's very easy to fix. And all you have to do is change the plunger tube spring inside here. Every one of my 1911s, almost every single one of them, I've replaced the spring with a Wilson Combat spring. They cost around $3. You can easily pull out the manual safety, and then you can replace the plunger spring. And now I've got a really nice detent on here. Again, it's a very simple fix for about $3 from Wilson Combat. That's one of the things I do on almost every one of my 1911s. Now, one of the things I noticed with this gun was the trigger brake on this gun came in around 5.5 pounds. Now, it was crisp, but it was 5.5 pounds. So then the question becomes, well, do you want to go to, for example, CNS and get like, $125, $150 trigger kit, redo everything? Or where are the issues with the gun and how can you lighten it up and make a better trigger pull? For me, it was actually really simple. All I had to do was to replace the sear spring. Now, this is the sear spring that I took out of the gun. And you can see it's been manipulated a little bit here, but this is really not a good quality sear spring. And as a result of it, that's why I was getting a 5.5 pound trigger pull out of here. And actually, this was very easy to fix. All I had to do was, I used the Wilson Combat springs, which is the sear spring replacement they have. And again, it costs about $6. And there's plenty of videos out on YouTube. If you've never replaced a sear spring, it's not that hard. If you're relatively handy, you can disassemble it, and then your sear spring sits back in here in the grip, and then you can adjust it and then put in your new sear spring. Now, as a result of the Wilson Combat sear spring I put in here, it dropped from 5.5 to 3 pounds, which is exactly where I want it. And it's a really, really nice trigger now. Again, all I had to do was make a $6 upgrade by replacing the sear spring with the Wilson Combat sear spring. And again, it works much, much better. Now, there are other things you can do on this gun. They're not necessary like the Yukon. With the Yukon, you had to do what I'm going to be talking about. But what I found here was, at least with this gun, I could fire it accurately. Now, one of the benefits of firing a 45 ACP as opposed to a 10 millimeters, 45 ACP are very tolerant. You can have a lot of imperfections, and they tend to run pretty well, as opposed to, higher pressure loads that are longer, like a 10 millimeter in the Yukon, where if you have certain issues I'm going to be talking about, it can really affect the gun. So the first thing I did with the Yukon, which fixed that problem, and I noticed it seems to be a trend in all of these Tisas, is that the disconnector rail up into the breech, that radius in between the two, is kind of beveled the way that they do it. It's not rounded. And as a result of that, what you're going to typically see is when you're firing a case or something, you're going to see little nicks. Or when you grab the case out, when you fire it, you're going to see scratches or indentations on the round. And that's because the second round is being hit by the corner of the disconnector rail where it reaches the breech. And again, it's beveled. It's not smooth and it's not rounded the way it should be. Now with the 45, I didn't really have any problems with this, but I did find, at least from inspecting my cases before and after I made the following change, that it's much smoother now and much more reliable. And one of the easiest ways to do this is, and I'm going to disconnect. I did this to both of these guns, so I'm just going to show you what this looks like. The first thing is, I'm going to disassemble the gun so I can show you exactly where this is. Okay, now the area I'm talking about is right here. It's right here. Now this is your disconnector rail and this is your breech face. And then right here is your radius. And if you look at it really closely, you'll see that mine is very polished up. Now, if you look at the following picture, this picture is of this stock Devil Ray that I had before I made a change to the radius, so before I smoothed it out and polished it out. And it's kind of hard to see from the picture, but you can see that it's a kind of a square bevel right there as opposed to rounded and smooth. So what I did here, which I recommend everybody do in every Yukon that you have, is take a small, really fine metal file and first off slowly round out the radius right here so that it's really nice and smooth. And once that's done, what I do is I take 1000 grit sandpaper and run it over the breech all the way down the disconnector rail. And then what I use is Flitz polish and then a Dremel with a polish head on it, and then polish this up to a really shiny, smooth finish. And as a result of that, you're going to get the kind of reliability you want out of your Tisas handgun, whether it be 10 millimeters like this Yukon here or in my Devil Ray. Either way, this is something that I'm doing now to all of these Tisas. Now, if Tisas was smart out of the factories, they'd be doing this already, but it is a known issue, which is that little bevel right there, not the smoothness. And again, for a 45, it still operates, still functions correctly. But if you want it to be highly reliable and not damage your casings and things like that, this is really how it should be done. It should be nice and smooth and beveled. And then you're going to have a very reliable 1911 with a very reliable action. The other final thing I would recommend that you do is, if you can see inside here, is the feed ramp as well as the cone around that. You want to be able to polish that off as well. So another benefit of when you have your Dremel with your Flitz out, polishing your disconnector rail and your radius. What I also recommend that you do is you also do it in the feed port and the feed ramp as well. It only takes about a minute to complete. Again, same thing with the Flitz polish, whatever. You want to smooth all that up and get it very slick and so that it is very reliable moving forward. So those are some of the big things that I would recommend that you do to the gun out of the box. Now, it's really amazing the value you can get these days in 1911s, and with my improvements on this carry, so everything we talked about there, right? So we talked about the sear spring and and the plunger tube and then doing the radius stuff. When I was done, I had basically around $360 in this 1911. And this gun looks and shoots as well as my other 1911s that cost literally 3 times this price. And that's what's so amazing about these Tisas handguns are, in many cases, they're almost exactly where they need to be. Now, if you're not going to fire it much, you might not want to make any of these changes except for just making sure that your grip screws don't move out. But if you're kind of handy and you want to make just some of these really minor improvements to the gun, you're going to have an excellent handgun that costs a fraction of what you used to have to pay in the past and still what you would do today to pay for many of the big brands that are out there. So if you buy one of these, expect to do certain things like upgrading certain parts and replacing them over time. The more you shoot, the more you're going to want to do that. But again, these are very minor, small upgrades that are going to really create a fantastic gun. So in the case, for example, with the Yukon, you can expect to do the radius as well as the extractor and the plunger tube spring like I talked about before. There was an extractor issue on the 10 millimeter. I didn't have an extractor issue on this one. So with the Devil Ray, all I did was the sear spring, the plunger tube spring, and then the polishing of the radius, which again is optional. You don't have to do it, but you can do it if you wish. If you're handy, very easy to make these changes. There's also a lot of videos out on YouTube that can show you how to do a lot of these types of things I just talked about. So again, as long as you're handy, you can do that. Otherwise, use a gunsmith. Provide them with a list of what I just talked about, and then plan to spend a little bit of money to have them complete it. But again, by the time you're done, you're going to have an outstanding handgun. So who is this gun ideally best for? Well, the first thing is, this is what I would call in the old days a perfect type of truck gun. This is the type of gun you throw in the glove compartment or whatever, and you know that it's always going to work when you need it. Another thing that I love 45s for is as a hunting backup gun, and one of the reasons why is because one of my favorite carries out of a 45, especially in the backcountry, is these Underwood 255 grain hard cast rounds. These really hit hard, and when I'm out in dangerous game country, there's only 2 handgun loads that I carry. I carry, for my 10 millimeters, I carry the hard cast 200 grain loads, and then my 45, I carry these 255 grain load hard cast loads, and both of them I am confident with in anywhere I'm at to be able to protect me from any type of prey in North America. And then the other thing is, there's a big debate about whether or not 10 millimeters are better than 45s or whatever. The reality is they're both highly effective. I know people that are skilled outdoors people that carry both of these types of rounds confidently. And again, I can shoot this very effectively, very confidently, and reliably out of my Tisas carry. So this would be a great hunting or outdoor backup gun as well. Or if you like to do target shooting, or you like to carry a 1911, this really is a great option, etc. Now, keep in mind, you're talking about a gun that is just shy of around 3 pounds fully loaded, but when it's loaded and it hit hard. It's a 45. And then the final thing I would say is, who would really like this gun? First-time 1911 buyers would really like this as well. If you got somebody or yourself that's considering buying a 1911 for the first time, this might be the best deal that you can find out there, bar none, in value, because the reality is you're paying a very affordable price with this. If you really wanted to get it top notch by changing out a couple of these small pieces, you literally can have a gun that you can literally use for the rest of your life. It is just that good. And the value and what you're getting for this, bar none, is one of the reasons why I'm doing these reviews on these Tisas, because they are fantastic 1911s. If you like this video or you like our channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.